It was a night where silence screamed louder than thunder. Rain poured down steadily, soaking the empty streets of the small town. Under a flickering streetlight, an old pickup truck stood parked beside a tired little gas station. Daniel Parker wiped the grease off his hands after another exhausting day at the garage, his breath fogging up in the cold air. He was a man who had learned to live with tired bones and quiet pain, the kind that comes from losing too much, too young. All he wanted now was to get home to his 8-year-old daughter, tuck her in, and hope tomorrow would be a little less hard. But fate had different plans that night. Out of the dark came the sound of hurried footsteps splashing through puddles. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman dressed in a soaked designer coat and broken heels. Her hair clung to her pale face, her eyes wide but hollow, the kind of hollow that only comes from heartbreak too heavy to carry. She stood in front of Daniel like a lost memory, trembling, drenched, and utterly alone. Then her voice came, soft, broken, and shaking. "Can I sleep in your car?" Daniel froze. Those words didn't belong to someone like her. She looked like she came from boardrooms and power, not from the edge of desperation. And yet here she was, asking a stranger in the middle of the night for a place to sleep. Right finger if you believe in kindness, second chances, and helping someone when they need it the most. Please take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Stars of Kindness. Glowing star. Her name was Elena Grace, a name once spoken with respect in business circles. She had been the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, admired, feared, and envied. But power can vanish overnight, and for Elena, it did. The people she trusted most turned against her. In one brutal board meeting, they took everything: her company, her house, her accounts. Everything except her dignity, and even that was crumbling fast. She had nowhere to go. No family, no friends who weren't tied to her title. She walked until her feet blistered, until the storm soaked her bones, until she found herself standing in front of a stranger's car with nothing left to lose. Daniel didn't ask questions. He simply unlocked the truck and handed her a dry blanket he kept behind the seat. She climbed in, shivering, clutching the blanket like it was the last warm thing in the world. Rain pattered against the windows. She stared out, silent and hollow. Daniel didn't try to fill the silence, he recognized it. He'd lived inside that silence once himself. Years ago, Daniel had lost his wife in an accident. One day he had a home, a partner, a future. The next, just a little girl who looked at him with big brown eyes and asked why mommy wasn't coming back. Since then, he had built walls around his heart, brick by brick. But Elena's presence that night cracked something inside him. The next morning, Daniel found her still there, sitting in the car as the sun tried to push through gray clouds. Her makeup was smeared, her eyes red from crying she wouldn't admit. When he handed her a cup of hot coffee from the diner, she hesitated. Her pride fought against her reality. But eventually, her trembling hands accepted the warmth. She started showing up every day. First just to wash up at the garage bathroom. Then to help with tiny things like answering phones, sorting tools, cleaning counters. Daniel noticed something strange. Beneath the expensive clothes and broken spirit was a woman who worked hard, who learned fast, who didn't run away from honest work. Lily, Daniel's daughter, liked her instantly. Children have a way of sensing hearts. She would follow Elena around, handing her tools she didn't even know the names of, calling her Miss Elena. And slowly, Elena's laughter, soft, rusty from disuse, began to return. But the nights were still heavy. Sometimes Daniel would find her sitting alone behind the garage, looking up at the stars with tears slipping silently down her face. That was the face of someone who had lost everything and was still learning how to breathe again. He didn't push her to talk. He just sat beside her, offering quiet company. Slowly, the woman who once lived in a tower of glass began to find comfort in a small town, in a broken mechanic's garage, in a little girl's innocent smile. But not everyone welcomed her. Whispers started in the town, about the CEO who fell, about why she was with a mechanic, about whether she deserved kindness at all. The judgment was quiet, but sharp. And Elena heard it. One evening, after a long day at the garage, she sat in Daniel's truck again, staring at the rain, just like that first night. Her lips trembled as if carrying 1,000 unsaid things. Something inside her was still fighting. The proud CEO who had never needed anyone, and the broken woman who was just trying to survive. She didn't know it yet, but the hardest test was still to come. Because the past she ran from was about to find her again. Right finger if this story is touching your heart so far. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances, and subscribe to Stars of Kindness. Sparkling heart sparkles. It had been 3 months since the night Elena whispered those fragile words that changed everything. 3 months since the rain had brought a woman from the top of the world to the parking lot of a quiet mechanic's garage. Now the cold had softened into spring, and life, though far from perfect, had begun to bloom again for her. She woke up each morning not in a glass tower but in a small guest room at Daniel's house. She worked at the garage in faded jeans instead of silk suits, tied her hair in a messy bun instead of sharp corporate styles, and found herself laughing over Lily's pancake experiments instead of rushing through board meetings. The woman who once only knew power was learning the quiet magic of ordinary moments. Elena would never forget how it felt to have nothing, which was why this small, simple life felt so sacred. Every drop of kindness Daniel offered had stitched something back together inside her. Every smile from Lily made her believe she wasn't just surviving, she was living again. But peace has a way of being fragile. One night, it cracked. Rain returned, just like that first night. Daniel was closing the garage when the sound of expensive tires cutting through puddles echoed across the lot. A black car with tinted windows pulled in. The door opened slowly. And out stepped a man in a perfectly tailored suit, a man Elena never thought she'd see again. Richard Collins. Her former business partner. The man who smiled at her during board meetings while quietly helping steal everything she had built. The man who watched her world collapse. For a moment, Elena couldn't breathe. Richard walked toward her with the same confident stride he always had. His voice was smooth, like silk covering a knife. He said he had regrets. He said the company had collapsed without her leadership. He said they wanted her back, to rebuild everything. Her name, her power, her empire. All of it. Waiting for her to return. It was everything she once dreamed of. But when she looked over his shoulder, she saw Daniel in his grease-stained shirt holding Lily's hand. No suits. No fake smiles. Just warmth. Just real. And her chest tightened painfully. Richard offered her a contract on the spot. The money was life-changing. The future, secure. She could be the woman the world admired again. But that life was the same one that had left her cold, empty, and alone. And the life behind her now, the small town laughter, the late nights fixing cars, the smell of pancakes, was the one that had brought her heart back to life. For days, she didn't speak of the offer. She walked through the garage like a storm trapped in her chest. Daniel didn't pressure her. He just gave her the same thing he always had: quiet space, warm coffee, and kindness that didn't demand anything in return. One night, Elena sat by the garage door after closing, rain tapping against the roof. Daniel sat beside her, their shoulders brushing lightly. She whispered that she didn't know who she was anymore, the CEO or the woman sitting here in the quiet. Daniel turned his head and said something so soft it almost got lost in the rain. Maybe the woman you are now is the one who finally got to live. Tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally fell. She didn't want to choose between power and love. But the truth was simple: only one of those worlds had held her when she was broken. Only one of them had let her be Elena, not a title. The next morning, Richard returned with a folder of contracts and promises. Elena met him at the edge of the lot. Her hair was loose in the wind, her hands trembling, but her voice was steady. I spent years building a world where everyone wanted a piece of me, but no one saw me, she said. But here, someone did. And I'm not leaving that behind. She closed the folder, handed it back to him, and walked away without a single glance back. That night, Daniel didn't ask her what happened. He just found her sitting in the truck, the same one she had begged to sleep in months ago. She looked at him through tear-filled eyes, but this time they weren't the eyes of a broken woman. They were the eyes of someone who had finally chosen to live, not just survive. Without words, Daniel reached out and held her hand. For the first time, she didn't flinch. She let herself feel the warmth she once thought she didn't deserve. Lily, watching from the porch, ran toward them laughing, wrapping her small arms around both their legs. In that simple, perfect moment, Elena realized something she had never understood in all her years of chasing power: home isn't a place. It's a heartbeat you trust. Weeks later, the town that once whispered began to smile when they saw them together. Elena found a way to use her skills to help local businesses grow. She and Daniel rebuilt the garage, expanded it, and turned it into something beautiful. Not a castle, but a home. And some nights, when the rain fell just like that first night, Elena would climb into the old truck, close her eyes, and whisper to herself, "I made it home." The sky was soft that morning, not too bright, not too gray, the kind of morning that feels like it's holding its breath before something beautiful happens. The wind carried the smell of spring flowers, the sound of church bells echoed softly through the little town, and sunlight poured through the trees like golden silk. In the small white church at the end of the street, people gathered, not in tuxedos and tiaras, but in warm smiles and familiar faces. It wasn't a wedding built on luxury. There were no cameras flashing, no grand stages. It was simple, honest, real. And that's what made it perfect. Elena stood in front of a mirror in a quiet room behind the church. Her dress was nothing like the designer gowns she used to wear in her old world. It was soft, ivory, flowing like a whisper. Her hair was down, slightly curled, with Lily's tiny hands having tucked a few white daisies into it earlier that morning. She didn't see the reflection of the powerful CEO she used to be. She saw the woman she had become, scarred, stronger, softer. She saw someone who had once whispered, "Can I sleep in your car?" and had found a new life because someone had simply said yes. Lily peeked through the door in a pale blue dress, her hair tied with a ribbon. She ran toward Elena, her excitement brighter than the sun. "You look like a princess," she whispered. Elena knelt down, pressing her forehead to Lily's. "No," she whispered back with a trembling smile. "Today, I feel like home." Meanwhile, Daniel stood at the front of the small church, his hands nervously adjusting his tie, something he was clearly not used to wearing. The same grease-stained hands that once fixed engines now shook slightly, not because he was unsure, but because he had never imagined a moment like this would ever belong to him. The doors opened. Everyone rose. Elena walked in slowly, her eyes locked on his. And just like that, time folded. All the pain, all the storms, all the lonely nights, they weren't gone. But they had led them here. As she reached him, Daniel's eyes glistened with tears he didn't bother to hide. His voice was rough but steady as he whispered a soft, "Hi." Elena laughed through her own tears and whispered back, "Hi." The ceremony wasn't long or grand. There were no long speeches, no media, no flashes. Just promises. Real ones. Daniel promised to protect her heart the way he fixed cars, with care, patience, and steady hands. Elena promised to love him not for rescuing her, but for seeing her when no one else did. And when Lily stepped forward with the rings, the entire room melted. She placed the little golden bands in their hands, her smile so bright it felt like sunlight. When they said, "I do," they weren't just joining two lives. They were stitching together every broken piece, every scar, every late-night conversation under the stars. Outside the church, the town celebrated. Music played. People danced barefoot on the grass. Lily ran around with flowers in her hair, laughing the way only children can. Elena looked around, at the people who had once whispered about her, now smiling for her, and realized something extraordinary. This was her empire now. Not made of steel or money, but of love. Of kindness. Of second chances. Later that night, as the party faded into soft laughter and distant music, Daniel and Elena sat together in the old truck that had started it all. Rain began to fall lightly, tapping against the roof like it had on that first night. But this time, she wasn't shivering. This time, she wasn't lost. Elena leaned against his shoulder, watching the raindrops race down the windshield. "Can you believe it?" she whispered. Daniel kissed her forehead gently. "Yeah," he said softly. "Because I always believed in you." And in that moment, in the quiet rhythm of rain, in the warmth of his hand holding hers, with Lily's laughter echoing in the distance, Elena finally understood something she had never known in all her years of power. The most beautiful love stories don't start with perfection. They start with pain, kindness, and the courage to stay. Right finger if this final part touched your heart. Please like this video, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, and subscribe to Stars of Kindness. Sparkling Heart Sparkles.